The parable of the Inique judge follows the title, The Perseverance in the Prayers Addressed to the Intercessors. First part. The nature of the trial. To further show the importance of perseverance in prayer, Jesus, in the aforementioned parable, draws the attention of his listeners to the need for perseverance in prayer by taking the example of the steadfastness of a poor widow seeking a judgment between her and her opposing party, decided to complain. Unfortunately, the judge of the premises did not fear God and had no respect for anyone. Through this parable, we are bound to rediscover the dominant power of active perseverance in the search for solutions. With this in mind, imagine that the contentious area that pits the poor widow against her antagonists is a land dispute. Land disputes make the headlines of the bloodiest crimes, causing the death of thousands of victims. The widow was therefore grappling with the problem of life and death after the disappearance of her husband. But what will be the judge's attitude in this case? We suggest that you carefully follow the urgent procedure of this ongoing trial. Second part. Portrait of the iniquitous judge, which means excessive injustice. With such status as an unjust judge, no one could throw flowers at him over his condemned moral state, and yet he, a high administrative clerk whose identity mirrors that of a son of Lucifer. However, God had made him a judge of the place to settle disputes according to his justice. But we learn that he did not know God and had no respect for anyone. He had a hard heart and without compassion like that of the sons of Pharaoh. His arrogance had an unimaginable perfection in the practice of evil. With such a criminal status, ladies and gentlemen, what justice could he render to his subjects? You will agree, impossible. For without the fear of God, no man on earth can exercise righteousness as desired by God. As they are commonly referred to, Ms. Veuve, the applicant, begged the judge in vain and continued to say to him, "Please, master, do me justice on my opposing side." And the Bible says he refused for a long time. This period could be around 15 years. Not to mention the multiple unacknowledged dismissals that were too many. Today, no one is supposed to ignore the abuses observed in the functioning of the courts. A regularly scheduled trial results in more than 100 detrimental referrals to the plaintiff regardless of the urgency of the cases. It should be noted that the greed and corruption of certain magistrates clearly justify the slowness of the deliberations and the multiple postponements of hearings. God is firmly pronounced against this way of working and against corruption. This unfortunate widow had been totally ignored by everyone. She who had neither money nor godfather to cover her defense. Only God could be his support in his capacity as defender of widows. Psalms chapter 68 verse 5. Third part. The dominant power of perseverance. Widows are very dumbfounded, and it is in such circumstances that their distress is truly felt. They are defenseless and moreover exposed to any insecurity. When a judge is unfair in this case of the one quoted in this parable, it is very irritating to the people, unease aroused within the poor social class. As for the poor widow, her misfortune was great for having met such a criminal on her way. A highlight of the lack of an understandable and compassionate judge who could have helped him without complications. Seeing herself exasperated, Mrs. Widow was right to insist and accentuate her advances towards a hardened and perverse God, knowing that she would not find a solution otherwise. As much, she resolved to leave her home and overcome the multiple postponements of hearings. Looks like she had set up a room in the palace. Given her poverty, this widow could not satisfy a single lawyer in the face of such a painful choice. Her head was dilating from overwork and sleepless nights. Alas, what could she do? Everything was obscure, and she resolved to annoy the unjust judge at the cost of her life. By this, we attest that a repeated drop of water in the same place ends up digging even the hardest rock. Fourth part. Positive reaction from the unfair judge. Suddenly, the judge, seeing her constantly morning, noon, and night at his bedside, his mind grew impatient. Coming to himself, this man said to himself, "Although I do not fear God and respect no one, nevertheless, so that this woman does not come again and again and again break my head, I will do him justice." According to this parable, Jesus insisted on it so that we understand the extended power of perseverance in prayer that enables us to overcome all the tricks of capricious adversity. In His goodness, God will always respond favorably to prayers of faith with assured concentration than any man on earth. Not necessarily under the effect of any pressure, but simply that it is in His nature to listen and answer the prayers of His chosen ones. Indeed, God is distinguished from men at this level by His instantaneous responses. The Gospels testify to His promptness in favor of the saints. If God diligently encourages the prayer life, it is to thwart the onslaught of enemies who oppose our responses. However, our perseverance will allow Him to intervene at the limit of our efforts. This was the example of Daniel and his 21 days of prayer in Babylon. God is not always responsible for the delays that accumulate in providing us with the answer. This illustration attests that God will not be long in responding to His elect who cry out to Him day and night. Let us say all of a sudden that God will always answer our prayers promptly as soon as they come to Him. Before they call me, He said, I will answer. Before they stop speaking, I will answer. Isaiah 65 verse 24. My dear brothers and sisters, please use this divine grace with happiness. It is a wonderful privilege that is offered to the elect to pray to a God who answers their prayers in advance. Conclusion. Dear listeners, we thank you wholeheartedly for your kind listening to this teaching, and hope that it will carry you higher into an important high dimension of the life of prayer. In short, God bless you abundantly. End and stop.